All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is the 345 panel on this disruption of TV, I guess, or through the advent of OTT, the disruption of TV. So we have an exciting panel of experts here to talk about this today. I'm Mark Kapczynski, I'm local media and entertainment consultant. I'm going to be moderating today, so hopefully we'll have some fun and go through a lot of good topics and stuff. We are fortunate we have two researchers on our panel, so I decided to try to weave them and some of their research more directly into the discussion today. So the format is we're going to go through, we'll do introductions, we'll start talking a little bit, and then I inserted sort of like two quick research breaks into the program so that we can hear about some of the metrics and some of the analysis that they have for us to share today. And so we'll kind of take two breaks in between. And then if you do have questions, just save them towards the end. We'll carve out the last 10, 15 minutes for audience Q&A and try to get to all your questions by the end of the session. And so we should be wrapping up at 5 in time for you. I think they have a cocktail reception tonight. Usually you'll see them getting started here, so we'll make sure we end right on time. So with that said, I'm going to have everyone kind of go down the row and introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their backgrounds and so on. And again, if you have any questions, just save them for the end and we'll get through them and so on. So David, I'm going to ask you to start it off. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, and a little bit about your background. We'll get started.
My pleasure. I'm David Williams. I run the channels group for Pocket Watch. And Pocket Watch is well, we saw a big opportunity in the market for timepieces. We think that, do you guys know who Pocket Watch is?
Are they smart pocket watches?
Yeah, exactly. We're a new kind of kids company. And we really saw a great opportunity in the market in terms of the shifting of the media landscape and how kids are leading the way. I just saw a stat yesterday that mentioned how kids in 2011, 3% of kids had their own mobile device. In 2013, I think it was 8. In 2017, it's 45. And so, today it's even north of that. Kids' television has declined 50% since 2012. So clearly those consumption habits are changing and kids are really leading the way. And we felt that it was time for a company that would celebrate the digital stars and the shows and the culture that kids are really excited about today. And for us, a lot of that starts with YouTube stars. So we're partnered with the biggest YouTube stars on the planet. And a 7-year-old named Ryan, who has a channel called Ryan Toys Review, does about 1 billion views a month. We actually crunched the numbers. I feel like I'm now taking the research guy's thunder, but we crunched the numbers, and it turns out that if you look at the unique viewers on a quarterly basis, he is the third biggest kid cable network, just below Nickelodeon, and pretty far ahead of Cartoon Network, just one on his own. And EvanTube and Hobby Kids, and these guys are real stalwarts in this kid space, and it's what kids really love today. So we're creating new content, we're creating lines of products. We've had a huge launch with Ryan, building a franchise around him called Ryan's World recently, launching in Walmart and Target and Walgreens and Kohl's and all the major retailers, doing exceptional business. And we've got a book coming out under our own imprint at the end of the month with all of our stars in it. And it just goes to show the sort of shifting of this landscape and the new culture that we feel the market sort of needs a player like Pocket Watch to bring to audiences in a big way. I've been doing this for a long time. I did my first web show back in the 90s and startup and sold one to Disney and did a couple of tours at Disney and went through Maker with my friend Darren at one point. So I've been around the block a few times and excited to be here.
Hey, just a quick follow-up. So is your programming on OTT through its own app or service, or just maybe quick touch on that?
Well,
how do people find your content?
So the core of the programming starts on YouTube. That's where we see these massive kids and family audiences gathering in this for young kids. And then we just recently launched some shows on Hulu and Amazon. We announced a deal with Paramount Distribution. They're taking our shows right now, in fact, at MITCOM for international sales. We have soft launched our own mobile app for iOS and Android. We're working on a lot of other big distribution initiatives. We like to say we are going to be everywhere kids are. And so that's one of the core promises of the company, and that goes everywhere from OTT distribution to retail to, theme parks.
Terrific. Well, welcome. Shane, you want to introduce yourself next?
Well, I think my I wish my kids had Pocket Watch when they were growing up. I've got two teenage daughters, and they're that half-step generation ahead of the kids who are watching your programming. So I'm Shane Keats, and I work for a company that none of you will have ever heard of. It's a company called Akamai, founded out of MIT in 1998, about a year before the dot-com bubble burst. It's a company, though, that the folks in this room know anonymously, because this is a company that without which our industry would look really, really different. Video streaming requires a lot of algorithms and technology and concepts to be able to deliver kind of broadcast-like experiences to our viewers that the internet wasn't invented for. And Akamai happened to invent a lot of that technology. We are the streaming provider for most of the Super Bowls, most of the rights-holding broadcasters for the World Cup, for the Olympics. Hulu is streams on Amazon Prime, most of the major OTT platforms in the world. I started my career in a different world. I was a television news producer for NBC Nightly with Tom Brokaw for 7 years, so I understand what it's like to be working at a really mature and really profitable industry. And working in the OTT space is really interesting because it is so, it's a hell of a lot more exciting, candidly, honestly, than news, although maybe not the case these days. But the world, the industry that we're in the process of creating is changing so dramatically and so quickly, and hopefully this afternoon I can bring some perspective around how we can use technology to help our industry succeed and make some more money.
Terrific. Well, welcome, Shane.
Thanks.
You. Maya, you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Maya McCann. I'm the editor-in-chief and VP of content at RockU Media. That might also be a company that a lot of you have never heard of, but I think you might have heard of some of our properties. So we acquire digital media companies. I came over with the acquisition of Little Things, which was a Facebook-first digital media company that shared feel-good, inspiring stories and also produced about 5 hours per day of programming for Facebook Live and for OTT. We also acquired Cafe Media, which includes Cafe Mom, Revelist, and Mamas Latinas, and also Baby Name Wizard. And then we most recently acquired Mom.me, so that's our newest site. So we speak to a lot of moms, but our mission is to amplify the voices of multicultural millennials. We do a ton of video programming, and I oversee the video content team, which our structure is a shared service model. So we have one video team that is producing all of the content for all of the properties, and I also get to play a role in the distribution of that content, where it goes, and of course we always have in mind, we keep our distribution platform in mind when we're producing the content, so I can speak a lot to that. But we learned about that through trial and error, because at one point we were trying to distribute our content everywhere without really thinking about how we were producing it. Actually, I should say we were doing that at Little Things before we were part of RockU.
Terrific. Well, welcome as well. So, Darren, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, Darren Cross. I'm COO at Unreal Entertainment, so I run the business side of Unreal. We're a platform as a service, OTT platform as a service, which basically means if you have a content library or what have you, and you want to get it on a number of devices, from mobile handsets via iOS or Android apps, or a responsive mobile web, or tablets, laptops, or any connected TV through a Roku or Apple TV or any smart TV you might own, We power that from ingest to distribution. So we take the content in, we can encode it, transcode it, deliver it. We also lean in heavily on monetization, as our background is really in ad ops and ad networks. We have about 24 significant brands in our network, powering about 100 apps, including folks like High Times, Civilized, the Enthusiast Network, Popcorn Flicks, and a bunch of others. We also own about 25 O&O brands that we power content through and have a somewhat significant presence. I was just mentioning that we have a channel that's dedicated just to Christmas on Roku that has over 50,000 subs. We didn't make a thing. But so there's a vibrant audience out there. So we've been around for about 3 years and quite active with partners like Verizon Digital Media Services and Ericsson. So pleased to be here.
Terrific. Welcome. Zach, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so my name's Zach Shake, and I work for a company called Magid, which have been around for about 60 years. We're a market research firm who are in multiple sectors, but I work in the media and entertainment division. And we, as well as doing conventional research, we've developed quite a groundbreaking data set in the last 5 years, which is called emotional DNA. And what emotional DNA is it tracks what audiences around the country feel about the programs that they're watching. So it maps the whole landscape, so that's 170 plus networks, OTT, basic cable, premium cable, broadcast, and has about 3,000 shows in there. So I could tell you what Americans think is the most touching show in the entire landscape, or what is the funniest
What is it?
It's actually This Is Us. And so what that data has allowed us to do is allows us to advise networks, broadcast networks like NBC, a client of mine, ABC, cable groups like Viacom, Turner, as well as OTT platforms and studios like Sony and Warner Brothers. We advise them on how their shows are doing. It's like a complement to Nielsen ratings and gives a lot more depth and detail to the shows themselves and how they're changing over time. And then it helps with pilot testing and new shows, and we pretty much do a large chunk of the industry's pilot and concept tests. My own background is actually, I started out doing pilot testing for broadcast networks, then I left and went creative. I wrote on a few TV shows. I had a deal with Warner Brothers and sold a couple of pilots, none of which went to series, and then I came back and developed Emotional DNA.
Terrific. Well, welcome as well, Zach. Hunter, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Hunter Sappington. I'm a research analyst at Parks Associates. We are an independent market research and consulting firm that covers a wide variety of areas. Me and my team work in entertainment, and I specifically specialize in OTT. I write about esports, online pay TV, things like that. And so a lot of what we do is, a lot of what I personally do is I keep track of all of the services in the market. And for those of you in the know, in the US alone, I'm tracking over 200 services that are paid, over 200 paid services in the US, and making models for their subscriber numbers, what makes them different. A lot of we work with operators, content producers, distributors, and less on the how their shows are doing side and more how should you be thinking about finding your audience, and how do you deal with churn, how do you deal with marketing, and things like that. And so we kind of help inform go-to-market strategies for several providers with the research that we come up with. And a lot of it's consumer-based. So we survey consumers all year round about what they have, what they think about shows, how much they're spending, things like that, to help inform our clients about what the market looks like and where it's trending and what we think it's going to look like in the future.
Terrific. Well, welcome everyone. So, Dave, I'm going to pick on you first here to get us started. So, the whole topic of the panel is about disruption and how OTT is disrupting TV. The question I want to ask everyone is going to be around what's actually being disrupted, by who and how.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to frame it. It's funny because when I think about it, it's hard for me not to think about the music business and how it was disrupted. And I feel like one of the major points of disruption there was the bundle, was the you would pay $16 for a CD that had one or two songs that you wanted and a bunch that you didn't, but you paid it anyway, and there wasn't really a lot of choice. And when you think about the market today, I think what you're seeing is a lot of these kind of classic cable bundles are, there's a lot of channels there, and a lot of us don't tend to watch a big fraction of them. So I think that's one of the things that has opened the door to disruption. And I think that when you think about the value proposition compared to some of the SVOD services that have come up, like Netflix and Hulu and the like, and YouTube, they are able to satisfy consumers. YouTube's not even SVOD, but there's a tremendous amount of choice out there to sort of scratch that entertainment itch that keeps you sort of in a user experience that is designed to retain you and uses artificial intelligence to keep you watching. And I think you compare that to sort of that loose bundle that you get with the pay TV ecosystem, and sort of the lack of intelligence behind how they intend to keep you watching, and you've really got a recipe for a transition.
So who's the culprit in all of this? Are you the culprit? Is Pocket Watch the culprit in the disruption here?
Absolutely.
Who's really the instigator around all that, do you think?
I think that it's technology, and I think it's a group of people. Akamai is a big player in the
We apologize.
It's that whole we've been working on this stuff for 20, 30 years now, and building an infrastructure that's really efficient in terms of matching content to people and delivering it to them efficiently and monetizing it at high value, especially when you think about the targetability and personalization and things like that from the advertising side as well. So I point to the technology as kind of the thing that ultimately pushes that sort of stone along. But
Yeah, I'd put a finer point on that. I think it's the phone. I think it's the phone, smartphones in particular. So, I mean, we saw that at Fandango in 2009, changing behaviors, changing use cases, changing value to the consumer. But I see that as a parent. My son has a large piece of my phone, a large piece of his mother's phone. He has a tablet. So he really has command and control over his entertainment consumption experience. So this has put him in charge in a way that when I was a kid, when you were a kid, it was not the same kind of ability to find and control, especially with YouTube, where YouTube is so image-based. He doesn't have to read, which he doesn't read yet, so it's really great for him. So he just finds thumbnails that are relevant, and he just navigates himself pretty seamlessly, and he's been doing it since he's 3. So I think that's a big culprit, and not that that's a bad thing.
So is your kid and his phone?
I just think it's access to that phone.
Just a little footnote on that is that, in observing it, I actually think that the empowerment of those devices to kids is as much a part of their sort of addiction as the content.
Totally.
I agree. I think it's like, think about the transistor radio. So teenagers could finally listen to rock and roll.
The what?
My hair.
I'm sorry, I had to do that. I'm sorry.
But they could listen to rock and roll without their parents eavesdropping, and who cared if the fidelity of this device was horrible, but it was magical to be able to listen to Elvis or the Beatles or whomever without your parents caring. So my kids are a little older. My now 16-year-old daughter, last year, I'm watching her like this on the couch, and I go over to her and I said, "What are you doing?" She says, "I'm watching Nashville." Now, why she's watching Nashville, I don't know, because the 3rd season was terrible, but I said, "Honey, there's like a 50-inch TV over there." And she says, "Yeah, but I got to keep up with my Snapchat streaks." So it's like, it's a combination, I think, of technology and consumer behavior enabling each other to disrupt a really profitable business. Really profitable.
Maya, what's being disrupted and by who?
Yeah, I mean, just sitting here thinking about it, I think that, I was telling my friends that I'm part of the most special generation. I think everybody thinks that, but I'm an older millennial, which means I remember life. I remember getting my first text message and I was driving and I was 17. And I checked it while driving. I'll out myself. But I remember being kind of force-fed television. Like, you'd watch a show you liked at 8 o'clock, and then some crap would come on at 9, and you'd have to sit there and watch it. And now, if you don't like what's being force-fed to you by, or what the show is, you just never have to watch it again, and it never really will cross your path again if you don't select it. So in a roundabout way, I feel like content creators have a lot more power. I think we've also seen shows with huge fan bases basically getting put back on when in the past they would have been canceled and you would have never seen them again. Or, you know, you also see celebrities getting this second life as digital stars on YouTube and then driving, you know, significant revenue that way. So in a way, creators have a lot more power than they used to. In my space in digital media, if I create a video with a powerful influencer, and the video itself has to be also really well composed, really smart. So we just did a video on substance abuse and recovery with a very popular mom blogger named Tiffany Jenkins. And she distributed it to her audience and I distributed it to my audience. And this video on a budget of like $2,000 to produce made us $20,000 from mid-roll. And that was her. That wasn't just me. It was like both of us being able to tap into our audiences. So I think the refreshing part of the disruption from a creative side is that creators have a lot more power, and networks don't have quite as much power as they used to. And I think that that's scary from, you know, I think like a corporate view, but it's really empowering if you are an artist and a creator.
Terrific. Darren, do you want to add anything before we go to Zach?
No, I think I've added.
Yes. Zach, all right.
Yeah, I think the disruption is also just purely like numbers as well. The audiences have dwindled. Linear TV is like viewed less and less every year. Those audiences are migrating to all different platforms, and so people running major networks are scared because the viewers aren't watching shows at 8 o'clock anymore, like Maya was saying. They're not even watching it, you know, on their DVR. So that's part of it. I think the financing side of it as well is a huge disruption because basically like, American television had this like crazy bubble where basic cable networks were getting money from carriage fees from all these cable and satellite subscriptions, and that was financing, you know, on FX shows like Nip Tuck way back when, through to American Horror Story right now. And I think that it's those basic cable high budget shows that are really under threat because the moment you have cord cutting, you don't have that extra fat that they can use to finance those high premium dramas. So it's AMC, it's FX, it's the basic cable groups, I think are the biggest ones under threat. Broadcast networks are finding ways and different ways to survive. They're finding ways to monetize less and less viewers. And I think the disruption is coming from across the board. It's all the players that everybody knows. But one of the interesting stats I saw recently on Netflix from our survey was so we ask everybody just who we survey all year round. It's like a couple of 100,000 people around the country. We literally just asked them to evaluate every show from 1 to 5 and every network that they watch 1 to 5. So every show on Netflix, its evaluation score was less than the Netflix brand's evaluation score. So what that's telling you is that Netflix, the service, is more valuable than any individual component it has.
Wow. That's pretty cool. So, Hunter, why don't we shift to you, and do you want us to also pull up your slide at the same time? Okay, so we'll do that.
Maybe.
Maybe.
If we don't, that's fine.
The AV guy's coming too to help.
So the big area of disruption I think that we've all covered is pay TV, and one of the interesting things whenever we think about pay TV is what made it primed for disruption. Why in the U.S.? Why now? What pieces had to come in place for this to happen, right? And one of the things that you have to realize is that pay TV in the U.S. is not the same as it is elsewhere in the world, right? So 4 years ago, the norm is that you pay $40 to $60 to $100 for your package of pay TV channels, and that's what you get. Whereas elsewhere, the whole we talk about skinny bundles here like they're this revolutionary new big deal, whereas elsewhere, like in Europe, people buy the skinny bundles and they don't pay for anything that's not, they get their broadcast and they get their skinny bundles and that's it. And so what you had is you had this market where everybody was paying for these mid-tier prices. Some of them wanted it, some of them didn't. And then you have all of these, you have Netflix come into the market, you have platforms like YouTube and Facebook come into the market, and all of a sudden there's content for these people that don't want to pay that kind of money to watch, and so you have, oh, my slide. So
We can put up Zach, so that might be more fun.
So it's not just the YouTubes and the Netflixes. It's also the Sling TVs, the PlayStation Views. So you have TV services that are. So take Dish Network, right? So they were a struggling satellite provider that had to disrupt themselves by taking their service online, and so they came up with Sling TV, and you're seeing AT&T do the same thing, and Charter has launched their own online pay TV services, and so this is some research that we have done, some consumer reported survey data about people's uptake of these services, and so we asked them, do you own PlayStation View, Hulu with Live TV, YouTube TV, any online channel TV channel package? And so we're seeing that our numbers are probably a little high just because it's new and people don't understand exactly. With any new technology, people kind of over-report, and so they're at about 10%, and I think actually a lot of services have announced their numbers. So I think actually we're at 7-8 million, which is 7-8% of broadband households, something like that. But you'll also see that about 13% of households say that they plan to subscribe to one of these services in the next 12 months. And so year over year, wow, year over year, you can see that just in Q1 2017, we were at 6%, and in Q1 2018, just a year later, we're at 10%. And we have 13% of people that don't have it saying that they want it. And so this is an area that's really interesting and growing quickly. And it's due to both price competition, and it's also due to the desire for consumers to customize their packages, right? So it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. I can subscribe to, if I'm a fan of a specific genre. If I'm an anime fan, I subscribe to Crunchyroll, and that has nothing to do with my pay TV. And if I am a documentary fan, I subscribe to CuriosityStream. And so just the services that couldn't thrive, and content producers that couldn't get their stuff greenlit and for a general audience don't have to do that anymore. They can just do it direct to consumer. So they can take their content directly to the niche audience that wants to see it. And so that's a lot of stuff to dump on you guys, but
there's a lot there.
There's a lot there. But that's really how disruption is happening, and kind of how we see things changing, and it's exciting.
So, Maya, I want to come to you, and then maybe Dave, and we'll kind of bounce around. But I guess, how do you guys define this area of disruption? I think Hunter's been calling it like pay TV. I think you referred it to as pay TV. Is it just pay TV now just shifted to this style of Netflix OTT service, or how do you define what we're actually even looking at anymore? Is it just a collection of Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, or is it these direct channels? Is it apps that now we stream through? How are you viewing kind of the landscape now as to what, I guess, pay TV has evolved into?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I can really speak to how I define it at work and then how I think about it myself. But at work, we're focusing on, so we're a digital media company, and we're focusing on building what we call like snackable content and then shows. And what I think of at work as a show is probably different from the traditional show. So like a show is 5 minutes in length. That's long for what we produce in digital media. And then our snackable content can be anywhere from about 30 to 45 seconds for a brand to a piece that's about 3 minutes. And we do quite a bit of content that's 3 minutes in length, because right now at this current moment, and this changes a lot, but in order to monetize on Facebook, and we have a ton of fans on Facebook, your piece of content has to be 3 minutes in length, and the advertisement goes on the 1 minute mark. So we're kind of tied to that format in order to drive revenue using video with the type of audience that we have at Rock U. But our shows can be as long as about 9 minutes in length. At Little Things, we were producing shows that were an hour long, kind of trying to mimic traditional TV. And as a digital first publication, I was definitely not the person to be leading that operation. However, I can produce a talk show on an obscenely small amount of money. So if you're interested, let me know. It wasn't a good talk show, but a lot of them aren't anyway. So we're really thinking of, at Rock U, we're really thinking of these like snackable pieces that we're using to drive mid-roll revenue, and then shows. And shows are oftentimes mini docs, because in a digital landscape, and particularly on Facebook, we find that with our audience, which is primarily women and millennial moms, real people do better than like scripted actors. So we're doing a lot of docs. The addiction recovery doc I referenced did really well. We also do cooking shows. Those do really well for us. In my mind, I feel like there's so many different kinds of video, and I think that having a conversation about the way people view and not kind of factoring in the non-influencers that they watch, meaning how consumed people are by their Snapchat streams and by their Instagram stories, and the volume of video that people are watching on Instagram also shakes up the marketplace even more, meaning Instagram TV and the way that that's going to expand. And I just think the potential for platforms like Instagram to start running ads, you know, in the middle of like the guy you're stalking's Instagram stories, it's pretty high at this point. And it's going to happen. So as a content creator, you have to be thinking about competing with people that people have personal relationships with. And so I think we're going to see a lot more very authentic looking TV shows, kind of like Blair Witch Project era style TV shows, or I'm hoping we are. I think we're already starting to see that. And then I think we'll see a lot of new formats as well. And I think that the brands that embrace these new formats, like, I don't really see anyone yet, and this is like, I think Snapchat's playing around with it, but I don't see any networks or brands doing really good Instagram stories, or like building a show specifically for Instagram quite yet, and I think that's part of the future. So I think like the shifts in formats are limitless. I think that the length differences are going to be powerful. I'm really interested to see a lot of companies are experimenting with that. I love to watch Great Big Story. I'm kind of rambling and I forgot what your question was, but I feel like it was really broad.
We're going to move to Dave.
Okay.
Yeah.
David.
Well, so much interesting stuff there. I mean, I think the part of the impression that you know, listening to you leaves, and I think it's a valid one, is that it's like just a big bowl of spaghetti. And it's so fascinating to me how many different sort of watching and viewing and engaging scenarios are actually all sort of viable in this ecosystem. It's just incredible. It's like, you know, first we were talking about going from 4 channels on TV to, you know, hundreds of channels. And we're going to hundreds of different scenarios. I mean, we're talking about, you know, we look at a lot of the OTT spaces, you know, there's Pluto and Tubi and Zumo, like there's all these guys who are doing like this linear AVOD thing. And then there's, you know, the hundreds or thousands of individual apps. Some are AVOD, some are SVOD. There's the Roku space, there's, you know, the social media and the social video space with its snackable content, and it's incredible to me how sort of the inertia of people's, I feel like a lot of it has to do with people's viewing habits just sort of continuing and evolving gradually into whatever niche kind of works for them. Ultimately, you know, I think it's going to be interesting. From my perspective, I feel like the power of the recommendation engines is kind of the thing to watch. And that ultimately it's kind of, you know, in a universe, an ever-expanding universe of infinite content, you know, the power of curation becomes a superpower in a big way. And the adeptness with which kind of with machine learning, you know, these AI recommendation engines can get to is pretty incredible. So, I feel like that has the potential to sort of conquer the world. Is these, sometimes I call them super feeds. Whether it's YouTube and its suggested video stream, we see that driving tremendous viewership in the kids space. Right, the kids are on the tablet. Darren, just as you were saying, they see something next to what they're watching in that suggested video feed, and boom, they're off there. And that suggested video feed is just, it's kind of using one of the biggest brains on the planet in terms of the whole Google infrastructure. And I think Facebook is positioned similarly with their algorithm, and we'll see, Netflix obviously does it. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to watch how they sort of change the space. And we already see it. And I know it's something we'll talk about later in terms of how some of these environmental factors are changing or leading to new formats and leading to new techniques.
Yeah, I just hope companies don't buy that space in the suggested apps area when you're looking at the recommendations. If it's purely based on your behavior, great, but I fear that actually it's going to get bought out.
It's going to get...
It kind of begs the question,
Yeah.
how much it ties back to like what Google did, right?
Right.
So it's paid search and there's organic, right?
Right.
And so how do you balance across those, right? Darren, did you want to add to that?
No.
Yeah.
I'm sort of curious about a point that you made, Maya, that seemed really interesting, that there's a lot of innovation going around in content format and trying to drive content formats to meet monetization needs for like a Facebook. What do you think about, it seems to me that there's also a lot of innovation going on around monetization models, like TVOD is cratered, but then you see things like NBA doing interesting stuff like that 99-cent fourth quarter offer, or you see some of the personal broadcasting services offering micropayments from fans. Prior, when we were gathering just before this session started, we were talking a lot about fan engagement and the power of fan communities and driving monetization that way. I'm curious if you see significant revenue coming from the monetization innovation.
Yes, I think if you have, so I produce on really small budgets, but there is something to the building something, giving it away for free, and then building a premium model. I think we see podcasters doing that pretty effectively, like building some sort of premium offering. What we struggled with was at Little Things, we built our strongest fan base around a daily show and around 2 people. It's called Refresh. And then Vimeo came to us and said, you should build a subscription off of this like crazy fan base. They tune in every day. And the problem was, that the hosts were broadcasting daily, so I would have had to ask them to be basically producing content on their off hours, and I felt weird about that because we weren't even able to give them a hiatus. Like, it was a struggle because the fan base was really rabid, and so like around Christmas we did reruns and everybody freaked out at us because we were also piping it through Facebook Live. But I think people will pay for something premium. It's just, how do you balance producing that premium product, because there is a ramp up period, and then how do you price it? So we knew that if we did a premium product for this Facebook Live show that had a very large fan base, we could I only felt right pricing it like $1.99, and that means I can't do the math quickly, but I would need a lot of subscribers right away to even give myself $20,000 and break even to produce it. Because you don't want to charge, here's the thing, you never want to charge more than Netflix. And Netflix doesn't charge a lot. Netflix is what, like $11.99 now? I don't even know. But it was $7.99 at the time, and I'm like, I can't charge $5.99 and be giving people one bonus show a week. That's insane, and no one's going to pay for it. Especially with our audience, I just knew they were too thrifty to do it. So I think that's what's challenging with subscriptions, but I think it is doable. And I think we'll get there. And I think that the tough thing will be negotiating with talent around that, because a lot of it would be behind the scenes access, I think.
Hunter, did you want to add to that?
I think that one of the big trends that we're personally following is the trend of self-aggregation of content. And so, like we talked about it a little bit before, but like pay TV was this big package, right? And it had all of the things that everybody wanted. But we see, but with the way things have gone, we see the market differently today. And so, for example, OTT subscriptions, right? So OTT is still growing, but it's growing in terms of the people that already have OTT subscriptions are subscribing to more OTT services. And so what that means is that people are taking a service here that they want, taking a service there that they want, and kind of creating their own packages. And so kind of the way that this works is that households will have kind of a primary service that's usually kind of generalized. Maybe it's Netflix, maybe it's pay TV, maybe it's Sling TV, but they have kind of a general service, and then they plug in the holes, so to speak, of the content that is not offered, right? And so, like I said, if you're into documentaries, then you subscribe to a service like CuriosityStream to kind of fill that hole. And so that's kind of how we see consumers doing it. And it doesn't have to be through OTT. It could be that they're esports fans and they're filling that gap through Twitch. It could be a lot of things, but just the way that consumers are self-aggregating their services, and the operators of the world are recognizing that, and the Amazons of the world are recognizing that too, and they're trying to help consumers do that. So that's why you're seeing the Comcasts of the world offer Netflix and offer CuriosityStream and offer Blu-ray karaoke, whatever, on their platforms that you can subscribe to several OTT services through X1, and you can subscribe to almost any service through Amazon channels. And so the big players of the world are kind of still trying to control and have their hand on how that aggregation is going to work. But I mean, the real power is in the hands of the consumers and the producers today, because like we said before, if you can find an audience, then consumers have proven time and time again that they're willing to pay for content that they want to watch.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too. Like, it shouldn't be lost that in a lot of ways when we say what's driving this disruption, a lot of it is the democratization. It's a victory for democratization. It turns out we all have a lot to say and a lot that we want to put into the world, and it's pretty amazing that we're building new brands. I work with a 7-year-old who's building a monster franchise on the scale of Nickelodeon, and here you have these sort of legacy cable brands and broadcast brands that are getting left in the dust.
Yeah, well, one of the things is that the good news for everybody is that our findings consistently show that just because you subscribe to one service doesn't make you any less likely to subscribe to several others. So those people out there who are afraid of the big bad Netflix and like they're spending their subscription dollars on Netflix and not my service. Well,
and some of them are doing it direct to fan, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Patreon, the Twitch talk about monetization models, like those Twitch monetization models with sponsorship to individuals.
So the idea is just that you don't need to be afraid that other people are successful, because a lot of video services are complementary to one another. So that's why you're seeing a lot of partnerships in this space, is because these services are like, man, we're doing well by ourselves, but we could do even better if we could find like-minded services and work together and like make our own kind of bundles. So that's a really interesting trend that we're following.
Zach, how about we jump to you and some of the research that you brought?
Sure, yeah. If it's still relevant, yeah. Right, yeah, so this is based on surveys that we have carried out, and it was tracking year on year the percentage of consumers who are paying for these SVOD services. As you would expect, Netflix is at the top. I think the next slide is the one that's a bit more interesting than this one, actually, if we just want to skip to that. This, just because we were talking a bit before about, I think Darren mentioned about the phone, and what's interesting I find about this slide is that connected TV is actually the primary platform for SVOD viewing. And I think that because we all, we all go off of our own experiences, but to me that suggests that the TV isn't a dying device necessarily, like people think.
Right.
The surprising thing for me there is that computer is as high as it is.
Yeah.
I think that partly has to do, just a guess, that a lot of subscription has to do with age, right? So you've gotten some people that they were used to paying Comcast to deliver it through a box, so we'll just go pay this person to deliver it through this other box, right? There's not a lot of hunting and pecking and finding on their own. It's just getting the same content they might have watched on Comcast. They're now watching it on Netflix or some other service, and they're happy to pay that, subscription fee. I do kind of disagree a little bit with the previous point about no fatigue for OTT services for SVOD. I think there is. I think implicitly you have a number in your head that you're willing to pay every month for entertainment of this type. So you've got your broadband fee, which could be $60, $70 a month. On top of that, you may have Amazon Prime or Netflix, or perhaps you have YouTube TV. You start stacking it up and you start seeing your Visa card every month. You have some sensitivity to that. And I think someone like Amazon is in a prime position because they're giving you content while you're buying something else, so they're going to stick around. Netflix, they're in and out. They're really subject more to a fiercer competition for somebody like the new service from Disney or the new service from Warner Brothers, because they're creating a lot of original content. So they're playing the HBO game, and they were beating HBO at it now, but now there's going to be 3 others that are going to be ramping up the HBO game. A lot more original content coming in. It's going to be great for content creators for the next few years, but it's going to be quite a bruising space. So you'll have a lot of, I do it already. I'll be on Netflix for a while, see what I want, sunset it, go to Hulu, turn it on for a while, see what I want, sunset it, go to HBO. You just kind of cycle, but I don't ever turn off YouTube TV. I never turn off Amazon because got to get my package on Wednesday, right? So I think there is a certain, there's inelasticity at a certain point for the wallet of the consumer.
I mean, I think volume of content is a big part of that as well, because Netflix's sheer volume is so much, and so many studios have found that there's this kind of third life for their shows, like The Office and Parks and Rec, Friends, all doing super well on Netflix. None of this is original. It's all reruns, and it's new generations finding it. So, I think you're totally right. Is that there is a limit, but part of that limit is going to be how much am I getting?
What's weird is I know other content creators who have gone in and they've sold their content to Netflix for 2 years, all rights, right? Then they get it back and they're not sure what to do with it. Right. And I was talking to some, right, because the model's different now, right? But I was talking to one gentleman, I can't name him, but he has a lot of niche content and a couple different verticals, and he turned around and he packaged it up and put it on Amazon to sell, subscription. He does nothing but put his content up. They take half the money, but they do all the selling. And he feels like he's better off now than he was under the Netflix deal.
Maybe David and Maya, how do you guys deal with all this as being on the content creation side, right? How do you view Netflix and with all the stuff that you're creating, how do you view looking to distribute through them as well as the other OTT services? What's your strategy?
Well, some of it depends on sort of what the objective of a particular kind of content is. Like, we're in a brand building phase of our business. So for us, a lot of it is just making sure that the Pocket Watch brand and our programming is where the consumers live. And so YouTube does a really good job of that, and there's a number of other services. Amazon Prime does a good job of that. Like there's kind of places we can go where the monetization is nice, but it's not being kind of driven by that, and that's a certain kind of programming. It's kind of a brand first programming. I used to say it was sort of like brand, audience, or revenue. You got to know which one you're going after first. So we do a lot of brand and audience type programming, and then we have programming that is more designed for revenue, and it tends to be, sort of more upmarket in terms of what it takes to produce. So we've got, a show that's being created by Butch Hartman, who did Fairly Odd Parents and Danny Phantom for Nickelodeon, and he's working with one of our creator partners, Hobby Kids, to do Hobby Kids Adventures. That's a full animated show, just kind of like a classic cartoon, but it embodies that digital culture that we think, is so important to celebrate and amplify. And so that's more of a revenue show. We're not gonna just put that up on YouTube. Although we might look for strategies that we can kind of build excitement and some, exploit some of the sort of virality of the YouTube platform to promote it somewhere else. But we're gonna sell it somewhere. And similarly, there's content that we tune, to death in terms of really being about audience engagement. That YouTube content is really engineered for watch time for us. So I think it's about sort of knowing what the job of that content is and knowing kind of which priority you're going after, the brand, the audience, or the revenue.
Just maybe a quick follow-up on that. So do you think it's more incumbent now than ever for content creators to, I guess, be hyper aware of all the monetization options that are available and almost like tailor content for a specific monetization strategy / channel / distribution option and so on? Like, is that more hypercritical than it sort of used to be, right? Just write a great script and sell it.
Well, being in the kids space, I kind of feel like it's a bigger mandate for us than it might be for other verticals, because in the kids space, it's completely kind of taken for granted, I think, from a content standpoint, that your content will promote sales of toys, will promote sales of licensed merchandise. The proportion of licensed merchandise that's sold, to kids, 0 to 8, or for kids 0 to 8 is massive. I can't remember what the exact number is, but it's like north of 20% of all licensed merchandise goes to that audience. So we sort of take that for granted, and we are trying to work with our creator partners because to extend their businesses in similar ways and really look at it as these kind of multifaceted franchises. And then secondarily, because a lot of our creators live on YouTube and it's become sort of a single, YouTube's incredible. For one of the reasons YouTube's incredible, it's really still the only scaled video platform with this kind of user accessible monetization model at scale. Like, you don't have to go out and sell any sponsorships or do anything. You just you get to a certain size and you can make money, but that becomes very addictive, and it becomes a little dangerous in the sense of being heavily over reliant on one revenue stream. So for them, the sort of powers of forces driving diversification, I think, are even stronger, because who knows what YouTube's going to do tomorrow. There's all kinds of market forces and things that affect their business. They can make a change and affect your livelihood in a really profound way.
Darren, did you want to add to that?
No, I think he covered it pretty well. I mean, YouTube has, it's tough being dependent on YouTube, right? I think at the end of the day, even for the genre that you're in. I mean, actually, of the genres out there, you probably have the best one for YouTube, right? Considering that they have more of a walled garden now for kids, which is what it wasn't not too long ago.
Well, ask me about the monetization of that walled garden.
Yeah, I'll bet. That's why you're at Walmart. But at the same time, it's reaching its limitations, I feel like. Like, YouTube has a vibrant audience, still growing, but not the way it used to, certainly not in the US. It hasn't really grown meaningfully in the US in 3-4 years, right? Except in kids, right? But for kids, that means it's trading off somewhere else, and kids are the hardest demo to monetize, right? So it does force you to think outside the box and do more creative things like David and team have done. But it's also a difficult medium for a creator to plan for longevity in, and not just because the talent is 7, but for other reasons as well.
And we see a lot of paths for diversification. I mean, they're going to Patreon, they're going to Amazon Prime Video Direct, has it's a self-publishing tool as well.
That's
There's
powerful, right?
They're selling a lot of merch.
Because Amazon and Google hate each other, right? I mean, it's not like a passive thing. I mean, there is no YouTube thing on Amazon, right? Well, I bought my kid a Kindle, right? Thinking, oh, great, he can watch it there. No, you cannot watch YouTube Kids.
No.
Not even close, right? It's just there's a wall, right? So I think there's a lot of ground to be covered for kids, because kids are voracious consumers. I think Apple will probably lean in heavily there as they launch. Hopefully, I think you guys would love that, right? I think because YouTube, as wonderful it is for discovery, it's super hampered for monetization.
Maya, do you want to comment on that and how you navigate all the landscape around the different channels and delivery mechanisms versus monetization strategies?
Yeah, I mean, we a lot of it has been trial and error. We were creating, at one point at Little Things, we were creating content intended for OTT viewership and intended for Facebook Watch. And the way that you discover content in Facebook is different than the way that you discover content in YouTube. Like, it's really usually in your feed because someone shared it or because you follow the page. And because of that, the first 3 seconds matter. So you would have to create a completely different intro for that piece of content than you would have anywhere else almost. So that was challenging. And then also, we have to constantly be thinking about how we're cutting each individual piece of content based on where we're distributing it. We primarily monetize through our Facebook feed, through mid-roll. So in an ideal world, we would be producing everything in 1:1 or in 9:16, so vertical video, but we can't because of YouTube and also because of the way brand partners want things cut. So figuring out workarounds for that and, you know, being able to entice, I feel like Facebook is the most like you're running a sideshow. You're just, it's seriously, you're just trying to do something bizarre in the first 3 seconds that people are like, huh? What's going on there? Because it's just that infinite scroll. But I think that's something that people are going to have to contend with on other platforms as well, whereas on YouTube, it's more what influencer can we partner with so that we can put their name in the title of the video and monetize that way. So what we have to have in mind when we're creating content is very different depending on where we distribute it. Right now, we aren't distributing anything on OTT. But the idea behind what we're doing as a digital media company is hopefully we build a show that has a big enough following or is enticing enough that one of the Netflixes of the world is like, can you build this for us? And then we would probably have to tweak the format again in order to do that. But we would be doing that with a budget.
Shane, I want to kind of come to you, maybe on the kind of broader technology front. Like, what else is needed to support this disruption at this standpoint? Obviously, Akamai's infrastructure is tremendous and already out there, but like, what else is missing in your point of view, if anything?
Well, to Maya's point, those first 3 seconds are so critical, particularly for short-form content and with kids on this device. The internet doesn't do us any favors. I think we all know that. And we're basically trying to push HD and 4K video on a pipe that was designed to send text emails between professors at universities. So I think as content creators and distributors, you actually have to be a little bit nerdy, and you have to think about how you're encoding and transcoding, how you're handling ingest with Darren's platform, because if you don't, you'll lose your customer really quickly. Couple of anecdotes. I asked my wife and my daughter, what do you hate most? Rebuffering, time to first bit, basically how long it takes for the channel to load, or up and down shifts in bit rate. And my daughter, who's 16, was like, if I have to wait more than a second or two for the video to load, I'm gone. Whereas my wife wants the consistency. She wants that broadcast-like experience because that's what she grew up with. We did an interesting experiment. We attached galvanic skin response monitors to 1,000 people, broke them into 2 different cohorts. We put one group in front of a video that streamed at 1.5 megabits per second, another at 5.1 megabits per second. Think roughly really low end of HD and kind of upper end of HD. We inserted a 2-second rebuffer into the lower one. The guys who were watching on the 5 megabit stream, like outside of that rebuffer, they couldn't conceptually, perceptually see any difference in the video, but literally their engagement, the amount that they sweat, was 10.4% greater. Literally, our bodies crave crisp, beautifully delivered video. And candidly, we all do it really shitty. And Akamai is one of the best that I'm saying that. So stuff that we do on OTT would have gotten me fired as a television news producer if I had gone dark as often as we go dark in the world of OTT.
I think your sweating thing really comes down to, like, I see my son who's 5, and if he has to wait for more than like a fraction of a second, he is like, what the? And I'm like, hold on, bud, it's gonna give it a second. Daddy, it's not working, before I can even get there. Okay, never mind. I'm like, because that's his screen, right? He is dominating that, he's controlling it. So I think part of that sweating is like, I'm forced to wait at somebody else's leisure for my video. I mean, there is a certain kind of childish, and even whether you're 5 or 50, right? I mean, I just think that's really part of it.
So actually, I got to share the story. So one side story that plays this is my wife's aunt is from Russia, and she was trying to stream some Russian videos that are hosted and served in Russia. and they weren't buffering right, and they were constantly rebuffering and stuff. And so she's like, maybe I should buy, like in Russian, she's trying to tell me that maybe she should buy a new computer, or it's our network at home. And I'm like, no, it's neither of those. And I actually had to dig into my old command line days and like show her a trace route and explain, like, you know, like going to something hosted on Akamai or Yahoo and so on. Like, look at how fast it is. The response rate's much quicker. Trace route to this Russian server, you know, like hundreds of milliseconds delay. And surprisingly, you know, through the language barrier, she got it.
That's great.
But
Well done.
yeah, it's still an issue even for folks. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that if we want to talk about technology,
Yeah.
I know that there's a lot of hype around the whole 5G, and people are like, 5G is going to come and it's going to save the planet and whatever, but
I sat on a panel with Gene Munster. He said exactly that thing.
yeah,
saving the
exactly.
planet.
Exactly. But as much hyperbole as that is, I think that it has some big potential ramifications. So, I mean, the pay TV providers of the world have succeeded, right? Because they own the pipes to your house, and they can give you pay TV, they can give you internet, and what happens when you can get that same quality or better wherever you are, right? That opens up so many possibilities in terms of I could stream that, especially for like the online pay TV providers. So if I could stream PlayStation View on a tablet wherever I am, like
Go beyond PlayStation View.
Yeah.
You can stream PlayStation. You know, it sort of opens up that cloud gaming. And when you think about, because the latencies are so low ultimately, and the streaming is so efficient, and you don't really need a lot of upstream because you're just getting controller data, which is really tiny. And then you extrapolate that. Well, if I can do, you know, Red Dead Redemption or whatever, Call of Duty through the cloud, literally where the image is coming instantaneously, I could do anything. I could access like Pixar level real-time rendering on a phone with today's chip in it, because all that work happens in the cloud. So
and
it's a
that's
big
getting
disruption.
kind of off topic, but like personal cloud computing could be huge, right? Like they're like people that say that you never have to upgrade your computer again because we can just stream you better quality than and you just subscribe to it. So I mean, that's a not TV disruption, but some of the ramifications of all that are actually crazy in terms of the quality that you can get, and the accessibility and the portability, and just the idea that you can get the same experience that you can get on your couch somewhere else could be really big for like anybody, but especially the pay TV providers out there that are trying to sell their linear services. Because for all of the talk that we hear about linear's dying, linear's dead, there's a huge appetite for it out there. Lots of people still want that lean back experience, and these online services are kind of the next generation of that, and they're doing it at a lower price. And there's nothing that's saying that they have to stay at that low price forever. Google could come out tomorrow. They could go make partnerships with people and buy content. And come up with a premium TV service. So
I guess I'll kind of ask it then, how do you guys see then the role of the traditional network or traditional broadcaster reshaping in all this, right? Do they just end up acquiring all of the, you know, sort of a la carte assets and roll it up themselves, or where does all this go?
I just think if you haven't created a brand that has really strong meaning for a target group of people, then you're probably going to get left in the dust unless you're one of the big horizontal brands like, today, YouTube, Netflix, Amazon, that are sort of everything to everybody. You got to be one of those. You got to either be the narrow, you got to be Crunchyroll, or you got to be Amazon. If you're not one of those, I'm just not sure what's going to be left for you.
Zach?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the broadcast networks, you've got to make a distinction between those that are part of studio conglomerates and those that aren't. Interestingly, in the Disney buyout of Fox, it's the studio assets that they're interested in, not the network. Yeah. So I think that if you're a broadcast network that is part of a studio, then you're just going to end up having your own OTT platform, as they all are in the midst of doing, pretty much. As a network, you know, I don't know if there is much of a future, really. I give it 10 years max.
I think a lot of these
Wow.
habits are generational,
10 years.
right?
It's not bad, 10.
10.
I'm
being
gonna
safe.
hold you to that.
Okay.
Got it noted right here. All right, well, so why don't we take a few audience questions and then we'll get ready to wrap up. I think, can you state your name and company in question? Yeah, you right here.
Okay, my name is Yuri Cole, and I am a independent producer, director of feature content, but I've also done tons and tons of docs I went to Cal Arts. So I also, on the other side, is I run a thing called the Venice Institute of Contemporary Art, and we do exhibitions at museums, galleries, and alternative spaces here in abroad. And I have a ton of content that I've never been able to do anything with because it's art. And you go to a network and they say, you want to do a half-an-hour show per week about art? They roll their eyes because it's not in their four-year plan. It's not, it's a niche, right? So you guys understand niches better than anyone. What would be my first approach? Come to somebody like RockU and talk about that kind of thing, or come to somebody who's a
Yeah,
coder?
so Maya, do you want to kind of tackle that first, or Darren?
Go ahead, Maya.
Sure.
Some advice.
I don't know in particular, but I think that probably museums are also having similar conversations. I know that they're thinking a lot about experiential, but also building digital platforms, because people are curious about art and they do care. But I think that people who are curious about art, it's not like we have moms as an audience. They are not as into it unless it's something that relates, to motherhood, and then all the way. Like if it was like something on breastfeeding, that any study on that does really well for the group that I cater to. But I would be very surprised if the Met, the Rubin, New Museum, museums out here weren't thinking about building their own digital platforms and finding video to populate those with.
So I can tell you the Sotheby's are actually doing that. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I would look around online. I would look, I personally know Artsy is an art brand that's out there. But I would sort of look at the social media networks, look at YouTube, see who's catering to your audience today, and then see how you might align with them.
Yeah.
All right, let's kind of jump to a question in the back, ma'am. Name, company, and question.
Yes. So my name is Wendy Foreman. I directed the documentary on Mary Jane's The Women in Lead, and we're talking about that tomorrow evening. My question is, prior to this government, we were able to talk about Canvas on some of the big networks. Since Jeff Sessions has come after Canvas, some of the larger brands are actually kicking people with fairly large followings off of Facebook, closing YouTube accounts and things like that. So my question is, where do you think in the OTT space there's room for stories, particularly documentaries that want to engage people and have that educational conversation about something, but the government is considering it a vice?
Well, I have a little personal experience. So we power apps for civilized and for high times, right? Amazon is particularly stringent. They will not take an app. It's blacklisted, right? Cannabis, along with some other unsavory, I'm not saying cannabis is unsavory, but some other things you don't want, like child porn and God knows what. Talking about politics, but they won't take an app, but they will take content and push it through Prime Video that has a cannabis topic. If you ask Amazon, and I'm not talking to Jeff Bezos, but I'm talking to somebody, and their rationale is, well, that's a different department. Okay. But I also know, sitting down with the folks at Civilized, it's hard to monetize. It's hard to create content. You can't explicitly create branded content the way you would for other topics, right? You can't buy advertising or market against that the way you would for others. So they really, in addition to the banking issues, they've done a lot of things to hamstring it, and the current, love them or hate them, leave that on the table for now, but the Trump regime has taken a different stance than the previous, and I don't know how to change that other than voting.
I would just add that I'm not sure how much is actually kind of coming from a political environment. There was a point in time where marketers would spend digital dollars and they really didn't care where those dollars went, as long as the sort of reach was there and the spreadsheet worked. And we've went through some episodes in the last couple of years where some people got in some hot water in terms of finding out where their brands were being advertised. And Google's pretty big, and like the online ad market is kind of dominated by a very few number of players, and they want ad dollars. And so now brand safety is one of their big priorities, and they don't, brands would prefer that, cannabis not be in those ad packages.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question. Who has one more? Sir, name, company, and question.
Yeah. Hi, Ben from Direct Agents. I'm curious about on the acquisition side, if you guys are hearing, finding certain successes in some areas or you got challenges in other areas, you're trying to bring people to content or platform. Yeah, I'd love to hear about that.
What's the title then? Zach? You're chomping at the bit there. I see
really,
you.
no. I'm interested to hear what these guys got to say.
I'll jump in just because, I think about acquisition every day. I always say, find an audience and make them love you. And it's kind of like what I was saying about art. A lot of it is kind of figuring out what your analogs are. Where are you going to poach the audience from? And then look at what this, and everybody, kind of does this keyword stuffing thing where they put keywords into their title. Now, you can't do it in a clickbaity way. You can't do it in a way that you don't actually pay off on the promise that you make with your title, but you need to kind of find those keywords that your analogs are using to generate audience, and then use them and use the same thumbnail styles. People are looking for lookalike content, so you get, how do you become lookalike content?
Yeah, and customer acquisition is expensive, and it for most companies. In fact, that's one of the things that's one of the most asked questions is how do I reasonably, without spending our entire marketing budget, acquire consumers? And one of the trends that we're looking at, I talked about it a little bit earlier, is through partnerships and cross promotion of brands. So, just as an example of something that I thought was amazing for cross-promotion is, so we talked about Crunchyroll a little bit earlier. So Crunchyroll actually partnered with Twitch to run a linear feed of their content on Twitch, ad-supported, for free, for a couple of days. And so they're similar audience, and so it encouraged people to watch for free and then subscribe to the service. And so that's one example. All of the Amazon channels that you're seeing is another. So the trick is really to be on every digital store shelf that you can be, regardless of what percentage they're taking. You need to be everywhere and easily accessible. And that's all stuff that's not you're blowing your whole marketing budget on things.
It's the downside of the democratization of distribution. There's no single buyer anymore.
You have to be everywhere because your audience is everywhere and they're diverse.
Well, I think that's a great final point there. I think we're actually out of time, so I want to thank you guys all so much. So how about a big round of applause for Dave, Shane, Maya, Darren, Zach, and Hunter. So thank you guys all so much, and thank you guys all for coming, and enjoy the rest of the conference.